Good, good morning. Today is Easter Monday. What is even an Easter Monday though? I'm just curious. Isn't that just the Monday after Easter? Today is Easter Monday, and my daughter got baptized yesterday, so it's pretty cool. Thank you for baptizing her. Am I supposed to thank you for that, or is that like a given because it's a sacrament? You know what I mean? Anyway. Today is Easter Monday. Happy Easter, everybody. Today we'll be talking about two different sins. I know we're going through like the sin series, which was not planned, but we're going to be talking about the sins of pride and gluttony. Again, these are two sins that are, I think, overlooked today in the world and oftentimes even glorified. And so we'll be talking about these two things and just kind of and what the Bible says about these two sins and how we can obey God's command to not be prideful and not be gluttons. This morning, you are listening to the fastest growing podcast at the church gathered and scattered. I think so. Are we number one at CGS or are we number two at CGS? Maybe number two.
One or two. Yeah.
Number one might be the sermons.
One or two.
We're one or two. Top two podcasts at the church gathered and scattered. I think so.
Top three.
There's only two, I think. You are listening to the DCP. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang. We have with us Pastor Eugene and Junsuk, who are always here. And it's good to be here with you on Easter Monday morning.
How was Easter service?
It was a blessing to be there. Yeah.
The food was really good.
You don't know that.
It's bibimbap.
I eat bibimbap every day.
Actually, it's called bibimbap.
Yeah, so the bibimbap was good.
No, that's how they say it. Bibimbap.
Yeah.
When I worked in the city, they had a bibimbap place. And so somebody came up to me and said, "Would you like some bibimbap?" I was like, "I don't know what that is." He's like, "Wait, aren't you Korean?" It's like, "Yeah."
Interesting. Yeah, but I love bibimbap. It's great. It's healthy. It's nutritious, macro-friendly. Hope you guys all had a great Easter Sunday and are now continuing to reflect on Christ's resurrection on Easter Monday. Today we'll be talking about, again, pride and gluttony. Actually, no, Pastor Gene, what is the most proudest moment of your life? So I wanted to quickly read for us two proverbs. The first one is Proverbs 11:2, and it reads, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with the humble is wisdom." And Proverbs 8:13, which reads, "The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil, pride and arrogance and the way of evil and perverted speech I hate." So the Bible is very clear that pride is not a good thing. And it's interesting because, the world is a little mixed on pride. So one of my favorite artists, his name is Jermaine Cole. He has a song called "Pride is the Devil." So pride is kind of like, some people kind of like it. Some people think it's good. Some people think it's good to be cocky. Some people think it's, not a good thing. And so the world is a little mixed up on pride, but I think one of the main questions that we have to ask is, how do you even define pride? What constitutes pride? Because we use that word in a variety of different ways today. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind, and it's upsetting that they've hijacked this word, is the LGBTQ plus community, right? When we say pride or Pride Month, that's what comes to mind for a lot of people. People can also say that they are proud of people, like a father to a son or a daughter. But when the Bible talks about pride, what are we talking about here?
What is the Hebrew word for pride? Don't you have logos?
I don't have my new laptop yet.
Lagos.
Pride is geva.
What's it in Greek?
It's huper
Hupere
Hupere.
Fania.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huperifania.
What's huper?
It's
Hy-
hyper.
Hyper.
Yeah. It means like a super, hyper.
Yeah.
What's fania? It's like shining.
Oh, I was gonna say funny.
So, no. So a hyper shining is like an excessive kind of boastfulness.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we mean when we talk about pride. Not like I'm proud of my son, meaning I'm beaming with joy. That could be one way of expressing it. But when we're talking about the biblical sense of the word pride, I think we're talking about this excessive shining or this excessive boastfulness.
So then if pride is an excessive boastfulness, is there an appropriate boastfulness?
Yeah, I suppose so.
So I guess where do we draw the line between that? Because I think people have different reactions to this sin. So some people will say, "Oh, I don't want to be proud, so I'm going to show false humility. I'm going to tell everybody that I'm terrible."
Yeah, I think that's also pride.
How does that work?
So what is pride? When you excessively shine, what you're doing is you're drawing attention to yourself. And I think Pride Month is aptly named, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think it's using the biblical word for pride. And when you're talking about Pride Month, you're talking about huperifania. And I think that's exactly what they mean. You should be proud. I think it starts from the self. So there's a self-expression that
Yeah.
people now talk about. You need to express yourself. And so when we don't acknowledge, let's say in the world's sense, when we don't acknowledge the gender that you identify with, then we're not acknowledging your self-expression. But that self-expression takes on not just self-expression, it takes on self-promotion. So you see all this promotion of the self. Look at drag queen. That's a very, very excessive promotion of the sexualized self, as twisted as it is. And then it goes to self-exaltation. And so when you exalt the self, you are exalting yourself above what? Not just above others, saying, look at me, look at me. I remember when I was younger, I used to take the bus in Queens. And while I was taking the bus, there was I think he was Korean, either Korean or Chinese, but there was an Asian man who was most obviously middle-aged, but had a very, very bright red dress on with red heels. Stood out. There it is. It's not about, so when you are in the city, I think one of the things about the city culture is you wear a lot of muted colors. So because I was born in the city, I'm a city boy. I still wear a lot of muted colors. I like black or some dark colors. Nothing really bright. You won't really see me wear like yellow or something like that.
Yeah.
But people who grew up in the suburbs, not so much. I mean, if you grew up in, let's say, Madison, New Jersey, you like wearing like hot pink and things like that, yellow. Just as an example.
I don't even own those things.
But it is a self-exaltation. But self-exaltation isn't just exalting yourself over others. It's exalting yourself over all. And that's why what we see in the news, let's say going from LGBT and we go on, it's not the L's and the G's and even the B's that are now having. So as we progress in this alphabetical line, we're seeing it's going to get more and more boastful, more and more self-exalting. And in the end, what pride is really saying is, I should be exalted above God. And that is the ultimate sin. That is the sin of Adam and Eve. You will be like God. And they thought, some people may think that that's equality with God, which is also just ridiculous. But in what way are they exalting themselves? They are exalting themselves in equality with God, but going against God. So against God means above God. And so you can't be equal with God by going against God. In the end, you need to repress God. So Adam and Eve went against God's rules, repressed God so that they can exalt themselves above God. That's what pride is. Pride is an exaltation of the self, and it will always lead all the way up there. It will get them to a place where you exalt yourself above God. And through all of this, there's all these other selves that come up. There's a self-justification. There is a I talked about self-promotion, self-exaltation, the focus on the self, just self, I want to say the word commiserate, because you want to feel sorry for the self. So there is a, oh, woe is me kind of thing, but you're just saying that about the self. Look at how oppressed I am.
And that's the false humility, right?
There's all this. So all of this is pride, because it's pointing to the self, because all you can think about is the self. Even like jokes that are self-degrading. I think one of the comedic tools that people can have is self-deprecation or
Yeah.
self-degradation. But again, that is pointing to the self. So that's why people get laughs, and that person gets elevated, because he or she gets elevated, meaning exalted. So even in the self-deprivation or the self-condemnation or the self-demotion, all these things are all about the self, because it's all focused on the self. That's what pride is. It's about the self.
So I do have some follow-up questions and the application of this. But just to kind of summarize, the definition that we see in the Bible of pride is an excessive shining brightly of the self, focused on the self. And it is a self-exaltation above others overall and ultimately over God, right? That's where the trajectory is.
Mm-hmm.
Then where does that start and stop? And the reason why I ask this is because we live in America and we pride ourselves on our individuality, on our independence. And in the workplace, whether it's an interview or a resume, we have to make ourselves shine excessively brightly. That's so people always use fancy words like, oh, I managed, the moving of 150 tons of paper. Let's just say this is what Daryl says in the office, but he's just a warehouse manager, right? So we always have to use these flowery words to lift ourselves up. In an interview, we have to talk about ourselves. Athletics, we have to make ourselves shine. That's why we want the ball. In our day-to-day interactions, if we want to get ahead in the world, we have to make ourselves shine more brightly than everybody else in the class. So how is that pride? Are we not supposed to do that?
Yeah, I don't think we ought to do it in the way that you described it. So let's say in a job interview, people take it as a self-promotion. You need to promote the self to get the job. You need to stand out from the rest. How do you do that? You got to do things. And there are a few ways that you could look at it. One way that you could look at it is, instead of you talking about the self, when you're explaining certain situations, you're letting the other things or the work or the achievements talk about you. And so if you have an achievement, when you mention the achievement, that achievement should speak about your skill set. In the end, I would always think more about. So this is how I conducted job interviews when I was a younger man. And so I would be taught, you need to make sure that you sell yourself in the resume. In the resume, when you make your bullet points and line items, what you do is you use these like power verbs. And that's what we used to call them, power verbs that stick out on what you did. So it really shines a light on whatever you want to shine on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I remember doing these mock interviews also in college. And there was one thing I discovered. And there was this one person giving me an interview and another person giving me a mock interview. So I remember two instances. But this is because it was genuine, though. But I realized that these interviewers were really impressed beyond my resume. And what were they impressed about? And they said body language. And the body language was when the interview was asking me these questions, I would answer them. I would answer them in the way that I hope would be pleasing or in the manner that they wanted it to be answered, so that I could get the job. I get all that. But then the feedback that I got, two different instances was that they really like my body language, because a lot of people, when they do interviews, they sit back on the chair and, they're engaged, but they're sitting back on the chair and they're listening and they respond well. But you don't put your back on the chair. It's almost as if you're leaning forward and you're interested in what I have to say.
Yeah.
And you ask these questions because it seems almost as though you're interested in this company and you want to learn more about this company.
Yeah.
But at the time, I genuinely was. I wanted to know what kind of company I'd be working for.
Right.
And if I could stand by their business model, whatever vision they had, vision statement, whatever you want to call it. And if it was exciting, I'd also be excited with them. It's like, wow, that's a great vision statement.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I want to learn about it, especially if the vision statement was filled with wisdom. It actually, it had broader implications than, let's say, just one product that they're known for, something like that.
Yeah.
And so those are things that really stood out to me. And in the end, what had happened was, through all of that, I was lifted up. There is an exaltation. But again, I think there's a difference between trying to see what is purely self-exaltation and worship of the self and a service of others, looking to other people. Now, if I'll give you an example, a practical example. Let's say, you broke your arm.
My arm.
Or you dislocated your arm. Let's say you dislocated your arm.
Okay.
Ouch. Yeah. I don't know. You were shooting a shotgun or something, and then
I broke my arm?
No. It dislocated your shoulder because you didn't know how to,
Oh, no.
put the stock correctly on your shoulder.
Okay.
Let's say, because we just talked about guns. Now everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
Okay. Anyway, and then I go up to you. He's like, "Oh, I can put your shoulder back together.
Okay.
I can realign. I can adjust it so that your shoulder can get popped right back in, and you'll be good as new." I'm talking about the self. Is that self-promotion? Is that what you would consider to be self-promotion? Or am I talking about the self so that I can show you what I can do for you? And is it the worship of the self when I explain certain skill sets that I have? And I think the answer is clearly no. So if you're saying in a job that you are in need of these certain skill sets, and because your question was strictly on job applications and resumes and things like that, my focus then is on how I can fill the need that you have in the job. Not say I'm the greatest person in the world. I think one of the classic things so I've interviewed a lot of people in my life. One of the classic things I always hear from young people, it doesn't matter if you went to a community college, no college, or you went to an Ivy League school or a great college, almost all the time, people always end up saying, I'm a very fast learner.
I am, though.
And so I'm like, that's great, but who's going to come here and go, I'm a very slow learner?
Yeah, that's true.
I'm not a very fast learner, but please hire me.
Yeah.
So there's this lifting up of the self because you have nothing else to talk about. And I think the self-promotion, self-exaltation, that I think it ultimately is about these insecurities that people have, because they believe that they are greater than God. But when their skill set doesn't match up, they have to just cover it with more and more and more self-promotion. Why is Pride Month a month? Like people get a day for birthdays.
Some people get months.
Maybe we get a week for like spring break or Easter break or Christmas.
Yeah.
Like Jesus gets a nice little week for his birthday. let these guys get a month. Any kind of month celebration, whatever it is in our culture, a month celebration, I think, is a very proud or prideful, I should say, celebration. I don't care what you call it. Women's history, Black history. Oh, it's so necessary.
AAPI.
AAPI month. There is one. I think whatever. I think now looking at what we're doing with months, it's definitely a pride thing. We need to exalt ourselves above all else, not share what we contributed to society, but to show how important we are in society. And I get it that some people don't take it that way. Some people will say, Black History Month is about what these Black people contributed to society. I get that. But what does it now turn to for our Gen Zers? If you're a Gen Zer listening, isn't it solely about the Black person that has stood out from the rest and their contribution against all these other people? So we never. So let's talk about, let's say, the Underground Railroad. Who do we think of? People like Harriet Tubman.
Yeah.
People like other people. But did you know that as many Black people as that were involved with the Underground Railroad, there were more white people involved in helping free slaves? Like, what about them? Are they going to get recognized? Are we going to even mention their names? Or is that taboo now because Underground Railroads are just about Black people? It's like, it couldn't have happened without white people. It couldn't have happened without all of society. And who were involved? So I know this is a little bit of a tangent on the whole resume question that you have, but in the end, is it solely about self-promotion, self-exaltation? Because I wanted to get to my final point. It's about self-worship. And if you do self-worship inside your job interview, you won't get hired because people will know and they will be turned off. We don't want self-worship. Except nowadays, self-worship is not just tolerated, it is almost something where we're supposed to celebrate when
it's
you do
self-care now.
Self-worship, whatever.
Yeah.
The whole like lifting up, exalting, and just the awe that you have of the
Love
self.
yourself.
Look how great I am.
Yeah.
That's self-worship. That's what pride leads to. Pride is self-worship. And that's what God hates. God hates pride because so what is the opposite of pride? The opposite of pride we understand to be
humility.
Humility, but what is humility? Ultimately, humility is saying, I depend on God. I get it. There are other things that you can see humility is the lowering of the self, is thinking about the others. But I want to say overarchingly, it is about depending on God. And when you depend on God, that is the posture of humility. Look at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Not my will, but yours be done. It's a dependence on God that Jesus showed that shows the ultimate posture of humility in the garden. And so when we pray, it's about the dependence on God. I get it. It's the lowering of the self. It's not thinking about the self. It's thinking about others. And, it's not, I think it was C.S. Lewis that coined the phrase, but it could have been used before. Humility isn't thinking less about yourself, but about thinking about yourself less. And people really like that quote. And it's a great quote. But I think ultimately, humility is dependence on God. Pride is putting yourself above God, saying, I don't need you. I don't need you. I don't need you for air. I don't need you for, whatever provisions you are saying you're going to give me. I don't need you in my life at all. I don't need you because I can be above you. That's pride.
I want to just quickly go back. And the reason why I keep asking questions about the workplace is because I want to say 99.9% of the listeners would be able to relate to this. But
who's the point one?
The point one is me because I'm excellent. No, I'm just kidding. See, it's okay.
Sounds
to
prideful.
be prideful during this episode because people will take it as a joke. It's ironic. So the irony is okay. It's not okay. But so, okay, in the example that you gave of my dislocated arm, you're the only person there, right? It's not like there's other people saying, well, no, I've actually popped in 30 shoulders. No, I popped in 50 shoulders. I have an MD. I have a DO, whatever. So there's no competition there, but that's not what world we live in because for people that are applying to jobs, they're competing with other people. So they have to shine. They have to shine more brightly than others to get noticed, to get hired. And so how does that work then? Because are we to then lower ourselves and shine less brightly and trust that God will provide, or how do we?
No. I don't think so. Even that kind of, veiling of your own skills and things like that, when someone's
Yeah.
asking for it, that's weird to me. Why would you
Right.
do that?
Right.
I don't think that's it. I think it's about appropriately and just correctly assessing the self and being able
I see.
to articulate that in an interview, saying, I have these skill sets and I believe that I can be of, use to your company. I can really help you. I really want to stand alongside you. And I think that I think the general public understands this. This is not, I'm not saying anything like mind blowing right now
Mm-hmm.
when I talk about this resume stuff. And so when you're saying, oh, there's another guy
Yeah.
with that popped in 50 shoulders when I popped in 30. I mean, how do you know that? I don't even know that, because
Right.
when I'm doing resumes, when I'm interviewing, people don't know what other people said unless I do like a
Right.
group interview. And then I might just do that to see your reaction. Why would I hire someone who popped in 30 over someone who popped in 50? Maybe people who popped in 50 didn't do it well.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just trash the way they popped in those shoulders. And so I could talk about, the 30. So I don't know if I'm better or worse, but I do know about my 30 and I can really be able to articulate it well. So even job interviews for me is a way for you to grow and mature, whether you get the job or not, in your skill sets, in the way you can present yourself, in the way you can say, look, these are the skill sets I have. This is part of the body that I belong to, even in church. I can do this, I can do that. And would you allow me to do that?
Mm.
And so it could be even in church. Let's say we're talking about First Corinthians and we're talking about the body of Christ, and you believe that you are a hand in the body of Christ. And then some other leaders will go out to you and be like, actually, I don't think you're a hand. I think you're more of an arm. And then they can
Oh.
explain what the difference in metaphors are, whatever the case is. Are you willing to listen? Are you
Yeah.
willing to, maybe you think they're wrong. And that you, even the way that you address it, the way that you would even have these conversations wouldn't be for the sole purpose of self-promotion and self-exaltation. I think that's the point. The whole purpose is so that the church is built. So you really love the church. You really love Christ. You want to serve Christ. And I think that kind of attitude goes into other places in our lives, whether it be a secular environment, whether it's in your home, whether it's in school. I think it starts to play out there. This is something that my wife and I talk about. And when we start to keep score or keep count, then we know something's wrong. That we need to talk about something, because I could say, oh, I woke up and I did the night duties for Elizabeth, our baby.
Yeah.
And then if she comes back and says, well, I did it yesterday and the day before.
Yeah.
And then I could come back and be like, well, then guess who did it the day before that then? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you start keeping count, then it's really about you keep on promoting the self over and over and over again, because there's something wrong. There's something amiss. And that's something that you want to kind of put your finger on, because if you keep on keeping score, then the relationship starts to deteriorate. Because in the end, self-promotion is a kind of spiritual suicide. You are literally killing yourself by continuing to promote the self. The only way we can be resurrected or we can live is if God resurrects us and if God gives us life. And so we depend on God. But when you continue to try to revive yourself, what you're really doing is you're really just killing yourself over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's very sad to see when you have couples or any kind of relationship. But I think couples play out really well, because if you are in a relationship, this should hit home, because that's when a lot of the raw emotions come out with people that we're most intimate with. It's the self-promotion. And so you blame the other person for your misgivings or mishaps.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like, it's because of you. I didn't get any sleep. You should have
Mm.
gotten up and do the night duties.
Yeah.
And it's because, and I did it the last 2 nights, and now I'm the one without sleep. Look, I'm a mess. Blah blah blah. Something happened at work. It's your fault now. That kind of thing. So
yeah.
there's always a constant blaming because you never want to take responsibility for the self. You blame other people, and then you exalt the self. So in the picture that you actually see, the opposite of humility is you step on other people to get where you are. Whereas humility is you are lifting up other people. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's really helpful. And what you said about if we have a correct understanding of pride, within our spiritual life, within the church, that would permeate throughout the rest of our life, right? Like, so whether it's a job interview, whether it's interactions, whatever it might be, if we learn not to be prideful, but learn to be humble, it would just automatically permeate through the different aspects of our life, right?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of examples that even C.S. Lewis gave that were really great that you could look up, even in mere Christianity. But I think it's this preoccupation with the self that really comes up in today's society. You're so focused on the self. You're always trying to discover the self. You're like,
Self-discovery. Yeah.
You're always saying, "Oh, look at this. Actually, I've discovered that I'm demisexual." Or
What is a
I-
Demi? Demi Moore.
No.
Demi Lovato.
Yeah. I think she
She
called
is.
herself, a demisexual. But, and I'll define it the way I want. Like, I'm attracted to the people that I'm attracted to. And I'm just like, that's just being a human. But anyway, we will call it this because I need to really exalt. And that's that preoccupation that you have with yourself. So what doesn't happen? What doesn't happen is you don't think about others. But what definitely doesn't happen is you don't worship God.
Mm.
So even when you worship God, even when you come to church, even when you listen to a sermon, it's about, did that make me feel good?
Yeah.
Was I blessed? That kind of thing.
Yep.
And oh, that hit me right here. That kind of. So it's that's a really self preoccupation. You're so focused on the self, that's all you can think about. So even when you say you come to a worship session and you sing, it's about you feeling good.
But the sermon should hit you, though, because the sermon should convict you.
Yeah, convict you to repent
and turn to God.
Turn to
not Turn
God.
to yourself.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think.
I get it. There is a after effect of worshiping God is you feel really good. There is an after effect, but chasing the after effect as the primary effect is called idolatry.
Yep.
So when you don't worship God and you worship the self, you're worshiping what would have happened if you worship God. God is the one that exalts the people. He brings them to his presence. That's an exaltation of the person. But in worship, God does that. But in self-worship, I want to put myself not just where God is, but above God. And so we want to do that without worshiping God. That's pride. And there is no satisfaction that comes with it. In fact, there's bitterness that grows. There's anger that grows. There is less and less satisfaction of the things that we were meant to enjoy when we don't know how to worship God. And so in hell, you can imagine the torment the soul goes through, not just the body, because the body is also going to be burning. The torment the soul goes through because it had once enjoyed something, but it can never enjoy it, even to that finite degree ever again. And that lesser ability to enjoy something is going down to infinity. And that's torment. That's torture. That's when the rich man said, I would like Lazarus to dip his finger in water and put it at the tip of my tongue, because he remembers the satisfaction that water would bring him, but he will get none.
Yeah.
And even I would even dare go even further. Even if he did, because of his hellbound state and his depraved nature, he wouldn't have even been able to enjoy that water if it was given to him. I don't think so. And so there is that torment that is there for people of pride. So it is a self-suicide. It is a degradation going all the way down to, negative infinity. I know that's not a number, but it's going all the way down to the pits of hell.
You said something that I think we need to repeat. And I think, Brian, you need to give him the organ sound one time. You said chasing the secondary effect over the primary is idolatry. Right? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Something like that.
I think, yeah. Just give him the organ sound one time, because I think that is right on the money. And it's really helpful for us to remember that. And I think this is just a helpful conversation, to be honest, because, again, like you said, self-discovery, self-care, self-love, self-worship, all of these things have been hyper realized today, and is a goal that a lot of people have, which is the sin of pride that's masked as, self-care.
Yeah. What's that Proverbs? 6 things that are abominable, 7 things I hate, right? Maybe we could read that verse.
This is Proverbs 6, verse 16 to 19. It just came back. This is Proverbs 6, verse 16 to 19. There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers.
Yeah. So the haughty eyes is a reference to pride, right? And these are things that God hates. So if God hates them, that means he is actively opposed to it. Does that make sense? And so if you're actively opposed to something, the word active implies movement. There is a move against by God. So I get it. We could talk about how the whole self thing is self-destructive. I get it. But there is an active move from God and by God against the proud. And then we also see it in Isaiah 2:12.
I'm going to read that.
Oh, you are? Okay.
But quick question.
Yeah.
And this is off topic, but this is exegesis.
Sure.
Verse 16 says there are 6 things that the Lord hates and 7 that are abomination. Why is that? Which one's the one that?
It's a teaching mechanism.
Okay.
So that you remember.
Okay. Isaiah 2:12 reads, "For the Lord of hosts has a day against all that is proud and lofty, against all that is lifted up, and it shall be brought low."
Yeah. We see that in, let's say, I don't know, Genesis 11.
Yeah.
With the Tower of Babel. There's an active opposition from God to those that are proud. He hates it. And I would even add, he hates it passionately. There needs to be fear in people who think that pride is a good thing. Pride month, whatever month that you have, there is no fear of God. That's why they have those pride things, pride flags, whatever it is. The government puts it up because there's no fear of God. But God will come and he will bring wrath, destruction. There will be a decimation of societies that adhere to this. And this is where we need to repent. We need to be very, very careful on how we even deal with things like gay pride and things of that nature. Because if we don't deal with it well, we'll also incur that wrath. This is why I think I mentioned it like last week or something about how even the Gospel Coalition had that video saying that we can call people by their pronouns. There is no fear of God when you do things like that. We don't placate to people's delusions, but it's not just delusional. It is an active move against God and against Christianity. Like even as we're recording Friday, but on Good Friday, but even yesterday, there was an arrest made in Colorado Springs of another transgender who had like plans to shoot up schools and churches. And why are they targeting schools and churches? Because people believe that these are soft targets and they're against everything that they're teaching.
Yeah.
It's the most cowardice act. It's the most despicable act to kill children because they are the most defenseless. They are the ones that should be protected the most. And yet they're the ones being targeted.
Yeah.
That's how depraved we are as a society. If we don't even say anything bad about it, we're scared to say anything bad about the trans community. Like what?
Yeah.
That's literal active opposition against God.
This whole pride thing, this whole sin of pride, is it actually avoidable? Is it actually doable? And I think Chunsak actually talked about, was it you, Pastor G, that talked about this in a sermon once about Benjamin Franklin's quote? In reality, there's perhaps no one of our natural passions so hard to subdue as pride. Disguise it, struggle with it, beat it down, stifle it, mortify it as much as one pleases. It is still alive and will every now and then peep out and show itself. You'll see it perhaps often in this history. For even if I could conceive that I had completely overcome it, I should probably be proud of my humility. So, is pride something that's avoidable? Can we truly be victorious over this sin?
Yeah, Jonathan Edwards also said that pride is the most hidden, secret, and deceitful of all sins. It is something that we need to really keep watch for, or watch out for. And what did I say the opposite of pride was? It's
humility.
Truly being able to worship God, which is humility, depending on God. I think our whole lives need to be worshiping, in worship to God. Sins lead you away from God. Pride leads you away from God. And pride leads you away from God with a quickness. How proud then Satan was to be shot down like lightning. So you can imagine that, how proud he was then. But for us, we must come back to this place of worship where we recognize that even as Paul will go through the whole letter to the Romans, explaining about salvation, how dead we were in our sins, and then that turn comes in Romans 12. Romans 12, chapter 12, verse 1.
Romans 12, 1. Romans 12, verse 1 reads, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship.
Yeah, I think that's when Paul starts to take the turn and see this is what you have to do. If you want to be people of worship, here it is. And then he starts laying it out post Romans 12. And so this is something that we ought to focus on, I think, in the very least, or very basically, or foundationally. We need to understand that we are to be people of worship. We need to worship God. We have to take worship seriously. None of this stuff like you guys spend too much time at church. That doesn't make any sense. We can spend a lot of time at church, and it could be a waste of time. But if you're at church worshiping God, that's not spending time at church. It's worshiping God. Even outside of church, you should be worshiping God. But the reason why the saints gather is because there is a specific kind of place and time that God has designed, ordained, that he has woven into our lives as Christians to bring more knowledge of himself to us and for us to be able to reciprocate that kind of mercy and the grace that he gives us back to worship to God. And that's in the gathering of the saints. This is what he has designed. I don't worship God in any way I please. I don't go play basketball and I think about Jesus once and oh, that was worship to God. That's not how I think. And so what is worship to God? This is what we have gone over and over again with the regulative principle. We're talking about how God has designed us to worship him in the settings that he has put aside, in the places that he has ordained, with the people that he has put over us. in just the songs and the Bible that we read and whatever is central, essential. All these things matter because it's about worshiping God. And so if you want to fight pride, that's one question that you can ask yourself. How do you take worshiping God? Where is that in your priority list?
And I think you bring up a good point when you kind of just distinguish between spending time at church versus worshiping God. Just because you're spending time at church doesn't necessarily mean you're worshiping God. Just because you're there on Sunday worship doesn't necessarily mean that you're worshiping God. Worship isn't just simply attendance, right? It is worship of the truth, worshiping in spirit and truth.
Yeah. So I would even go further to say that you can come to Sunday service and not worship God,
Yeah.
but you can't worship God without coming to Sunday
Yeah.
service.
Ooh. Ooh.
So it's the same thing as being baptized. You
Yeah.
can be baptized and be saved, but you can't be saved and not be baptized. You're going to obey God unless
Yep.
something crazy happens, like an exception that you say, which proves the rule. It proves the rule. So when we look at the thief on the cross, he wasn't baptized. He wasn't even admitted to the Christian community, and yet he saw paradise. He was in paradise with Jesus Christ. What does that mean? That's the exception. So that's the one instance that we see in the Bible where someone wasn't baptized because he died right there.
Yeah.
So there it is for you. The exception that proves the rule. Unless you're literally going to die in the next few hours, you should be baptized.
Yeah.
And if you had the ability to, even if it was in the next few hours you're going to die, you would still get baptized. Look
Yeah.
at the eunuch and Philip. He's like, yeah, why don't I get baptized right now? That's what he said, right?
Yeah.
And so here's some water. Let's get baptized. And so these are things that we ought to really take seriously. If you are a worshiper, you will gather with the saints and worship God in spirit and in truth. You will love the Lord with all of your heart, mind, and soul. You know, that kind of thing, and strength.
I think you're really saying some things today. I think we need to give the organ sound one more time, Brian. I think you said, just because you're at church, Sunday service doesn't mean you're worshiping. But if you're not at Sunday service, you're not worshiping. That was a good one. So we talked about humility, how all of it stems from the core of worship. And I think that's a great practical way that we can reflect and think about whether we are living humble lives or whether we're living prideful lives. But, last 2 Sundays ago was Palm Sunday, and we call Jesus the humble king. Some people might be wondering, what do we mean by that? Especially if we are to follow after Christ, and that's what sanctification is, and we call him the humble king. What does that mean, and what do we learn from that?
Yeah, I think really denotes there's a kenosis, it really denotes the emptying of himself to come down to us. It comes from Isaiah chapter 6, the condescension of God. He humbled himself and took on the form of a man so that he can atone for sins.
Yep.
And that's why he's a humble king. He didn't come to, wage war against his people. He came to take on their sins and to die in their place. What a great and humble king he truly is. And to show that he fulfilled all these prophecies, like even riding in on a colt and a donkey, right? He would fulfill all these prophecies that God has given to show that he is who he is. He is who he says he is, and he is who the Bible says he is. And all these prophecies are there to show us that, Jesus truly is a great and also humble king.
Thank you for that. And we pray that we will continue to grow in humility, that our lives and everything that we do, every word, act, and thought would point to God. We might have to take a little quick pivot again. This took double the time that I thought it would take. But we have a great Q&A lined up for this morning. And so we will talk about the sin of gluttony next week, and we will move right along to the Q&A.
We need a beat.
What you got in the bag? What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag?
This question was sent in. It reads, how should Christians view speed limits? Christians are called to obey government authority, so as long as it does not challenge God's authority. Speed limits are meant for good to promote safe driving. Should a Christian always be at/below the speed limit? If a Christian is not allowed to speed, what if the pace of traffic is above the speed limit? Wouldn't driving much slower than the rest cause a safety hazard for myself and my neighbor? If a Christian can speed only to keep pace, at what point is it too much? If 5 miles per hour over is allowable, is 10, is 15? On certain fast roads, I've seen traffic average 20 miles per hour above the posted speed limit. Is this not too much of a hazard? How should Christians view speed limits?
There is a great Bible verse that we can go to, and that's talking about speeding. It's 2 Kings verse
You're
9:20.
talking about the madman.
2 Kings 9:20.
2 Kings chapter 9, verse 20 reads, again, the watchman reported, he reached them, but he's not coming back. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously. So Jehu was a fast driver, furious driver, fast and furious. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So if you're going to talk about speeding, we should also talk about people not signaling when they change lanes, not signaling
Yeah.
in an appropriate time
Yes.
before they change lanes. We should talk about following too closely the car in front of us. There needs to be a certain distance between the car in front of you when you're driving. These are all laws.
But I think what this writer, this emailer is trying to even emphasize is the fact that oftentimes breaking that law is safer than keeping it, in the sense of keeping pace with traffic is safer than not keeping pace with traffic.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what he's trying to emphasize, saying, then is it okay for the safety of others to keep the pace of traffic even if it's 10, 15 over?
Yeah. I have some experience with speeding tickets myself. And it really depends. I think I was in college once and I was driving down 80. And I think a police officer, he clocked me on the other side of the highway. And so he was driving the other side of the highway. He decided to, shoot the radar gun, clock me. And then he made the U-turn and followed me or tried to catch up to me. And then when he caught up to me, I remember because I decided to slow down. I was like, I'll slow down. And then I saw a cop right behind me. And so the police officer is like, how fast were you going? And I said, I don't know. I wasn't really looking at the speedometer. He's like, I had to chase you for 5 miles to catch up to you.
Oh, man.
He was so mad. And so I have a few stories about speeding. So even personally, I remember doing, there's a ton of stories that I have. Can I give you another one since we're in a lighter subject?
Yeah.
And I hope you take it as such. For me, this is a lighter subject. If you take it too seriously, then you're going to be so stressed in your life. But I remember there was a brother who was going to go to Mexico for a long term. And I just ended the music team that I was part of, the band that I was part of. I had just ended practice. And I needed to get to the Starbucks because there was a Starbucks that a bunch of people were meeting in to say goodbye to this brother one last time. So I drove very fast. It was about 10:30. I forget what time it was exactly. And I had to go take the north highway before making the jug handle turn to go south because it was on the south side of the highway, which is how Jersey is built.
Right.
And so I remember driving really fast. And by the time I pulled into Starbucks, the cop caught up to me, or the police officer, and then pulled me over and said, how fast were you going? I couldn't catch up to you. Why were you going so fast? And I said, I needed to get to Starbucks. And it made him red.
Oh,
He was so
no.
mad because he's like, why are you going so ridiculously fast? And I remember weaving through cars.
Yeah.
Um, and I like to think of myself as a skilled driver, but it's not safe at all. So I don't recommend. Um, and then I gave him my PBA card because one of the friends that I grew up with, he's a cop, he's a police officer. He called him. He took the PBA card and he called. And he goes, do you know how fast he was
Oh,
going?
no.
He started yelling at my friend. And then my friend, he gave me the phone back and he was like, bro, you got to stop driving so fast. And I remember I started to slow down from there. It's like, oh, I shouldn't take advantage of this just because I have a car or whatever. And I was still a very young man back then. I think you start driving slower and slower as you age. And like when you have a kid in the car, you're not going to
Yeah.
go fast.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
But those kind of questions really do come up because it goes back to, should you obey the governing authorities? Absolutely. Romans 13. And the governing authorities set up rules and regulations and laws. They call them laws, right? It's a traffic law, right? And so let's say the speed limit is 65. Well, actually, we now understand that when they set the speed limit to 65, the governing system set these speed limits up, they also understand that the vast majority of people driving will be driving 5 to 10 miles above. And so they don't set the speed limit to 75 because they'll understand that people will start driving perhaps even faster. And if you drive even faster than that, that'll be dangerous. So they account for a lot of people that are going to be driving faster. But because it's a law, you can technically still get a ticket. That's where it gets a little complicated. And, the person asking this question might be an engineer because engineers really figure out, like, actually the safest way to drive is to drive with the flow of traffic. So if the speed limit is 65, regardless of that speed limit, everybody's driving 45, you don't drive 65. It's very dangerous.
Right.
But if everyone is
right.
driving 75 and you're driving 45, that's also very dangerous.
Right.
And so driving with the flow of traffic makes sense with physics. It makes sense with just any kind of mechanical engineering, right? It just makes sense when you do the studies. But it doesn't negate the fact that the Bible tells us to submit to the governing authorities. Now that you understand the nuances of even how the governing authorities, our law system, put these things in place, should you drive speed limit? And I think the answer is yes. I think the answer is you should drive speed limit, or you should drive below the speed limit. I guess that's why it's called a limit, right? So you shouldn't be necessarily driving at 105 miles per hour when the speed limit is 65, even though there are no cars. I guess the question will come into play. What if everybody starts driving 105? What are you going to drive 65? Because that's dangerous, right?
Yeah.
This is where we as a people, Christians, understand that the way our system is set up is it is set up so that we vote people in that will also change laws as necessary. So the speed limit isn't a moral law, meaning like if you go above 65, it's the same as murdering a child. It's not equatable. But they're guidelines. I know we call them laws. They're guidelines for the safety of the general population. And so I say all this because whether a speed limit is 65 or 75, I think in the Autobahn, what is it?
It's unlimited.
Yeah. So whether it's unlimited, it's not a violation of God's word if you go like 75. It's because it's a violation of the governing authorities. That's why we want to respect it. So not respecting the governing authorities is the sin, not the speed limit itself, okay?
Right.
And so when they set these things up, when you start, how many times have you crossed over a solid white line? Way more than you think, perhaps. That's also against the law.
I
right?
only jaywalk.
Okay. And jaywalking is also against the law, right? And so if you continue to do that, can you say that you are living in,
Sin.
or you're not living in sin? That's definitely sin, right? And so are we supposed to memorize every law that's on the books? Are we supposed to sit there and read every single traffic law that's in existence? And then when we cross towns, there are different laws. So are we supposed to memorize that? I think the best way for me to answer it is with the caveat saying if you sin willfully or ignorantly or in ignorance, there is a difference, but both are still sins.
Right.
But it's not like ignorance should, be something that we're proud of. If we are aware of a law, we should try to obey it. Now, will there be breaking of laws? Will there be breaking of these guidelines and restrictions when we personally think it's necessary? Let's say your wife's about to give birth to her second child,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then you're like, I need to get to the hospital right now.
Yeah.
Like that head's crowning. We got to go. That kind of thing, right?
Why did we wait so long?
Yeah. Why did you wait so long? You got to
What happened
pull
to
it
4 and
together.
3? 4 and 3.
Yeah.
2 minutes.
You got to pull yourself together.
Yeah.
And then you're probably not going to adhere to some speed regulations. You might even pass some red lights. Now, if you get a ticket for it, you won't say, "Oh, that I didn't break any laws." You did technically break laws, so you might actually get tickets. So, while coming to the understanding that you might get citations or tickets written up, that you'll have to pay fines for, you willingly broke that. There are all these things that you probably would take into consideration. My thing is, if you go through life every day, and this is why I said this is kind of a lighter topic. If you go through life every day obsessing which law you might be breaking, I think you live a very unhealthy Christian life. I think if you believe that God, for you to have the perfect sanctified life, you need to be checking your speedometer every second, which is, by the way, very, very unwise.
Even that's dangerous.
Yeah. You don't do that. So that the speed, that that you're going under the speed limit. I think you don't understand how grace works, how mercy works, and how laws work in our society. Our legal system actually allows for that, room for mercy. It allows for certain gaps, and I get that. Because let's even go to police officers who writes you the tickets. Police officers.
Yeah.
Do they have to write you a ticket?
But that's my question. So if they let you go, is that an injustice that's being done? Because you deserve the ticket.
Yeah.
But it's not like they're eating the ticket. They're not the atonement. They're not substitutionary. They're just saying, hey, you could just go as a warning. But that's injustice then, by definition.
Yeah. So unless the system allows for mercy.
Right.
And so I think our system does allow for it, especially when it comes to traffic. They understand that even though this is a technical law, there's no way for everyone to keep it all the time. And this is why people are really like weirded out by, in Britain, how they have all these speed cameras.
Mm.
And they're weirded out by it because it's so oppressive when you have cameras watching your every move, because your happiness level goes down.
What?
Yeah, you're not happy when you know that there's a camera always watching you to see if you go 1 mile above the speed limit.
Uh-huh.
And so if that's the case, how should we live? We should live thinking that if this is something that we ought to avoid, then we ought to avoid it because it is the law. We should live with gratitude. When you live with gratitude, then you also move on in that sanctification. Your driving starts to change. But I don't think your driving changes necessarily, or your heart changes where it would go into the actions of driving when you always think about the speed limit, even when it's not posted. So going up to church, there is a speed limit of 35 in this road.
Yep.
When the lights are blinking, you got to go 25
Yep.
because there are people there.
Yep.
Would you follow that law? For me, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
not thinking about going 45. I don't care what the flow of traffic is because there are children playing.
Right.
So when the lights are flashing, it's 25 for reasons, 25 for lower because of the children. So I appreciate things like that. I appreciate the law. I get to love that. And I wouldn't break that law. I appreciate it because of what it's trying to do. And so when you appreciate certain things for what it's trying to do, you can follow it. Now, if you don't appreciate it, doesn't mean that you can break the law. And I don't think that's the case either. I think there's gratitude that plays out even though you don't appreciate it. So I think there's a spirit that I'm trying to get at with this whole speed limit thing. In the end, what I will say is if you're worried about the actual speed, you might be living a very tiresome life. I think if you're striving to obey the law, I think that's a noble thing. That's what citizens ought to do. And if you discover that you have broken the law in an egregious way, that's when we ask for forgiveness.
Mm.
But let's say everyone's driving 75 and you drove 75 and you don't feel any guilt for it. I wouldn't go and be like, oh man, I am in need of dire repentance. And I'm
Seared conscience.
yeah. And so like, oh, I must have a seared conscience. Yeah, I'm not in that camp. I'm so sorry for those people that are like shocked that might be listening.
Yeah.
How dare you? I'm in shock. It's like, no, I am not in that camp. And I think there is a rule of law that we ought to keep. I don't like passing red lights. I think that those are strict laws that's also enforced by culture and things of that nature. And, you know, I always tell the story about Egypt, how it's different. People don't adhere to the traffic signals. It's weird. And they just do whatever. And there's gridlock traffic all the time in Egypt.
Yeah.
It's crazy, especially in Cairo. Anyway, I think sin leads to just the degradation of society. And so you want to always keep that in mind. And if we're talking about the philosophical or theological aspect about speed limits, I would think that of all the things that you can worry about, that might be on the very bottom of the totem pole.
Yeah.
I wouldn't really worry about it unless you're egregiously breaking the law. Like if it's 65 and you're going 105, like we have someone in our church that drives like Jehu.
Yep.
And we
He used
have
to.
admonished this person. Yeah, you're a very dangerous driver.
Yeah.
And I guess what changed is that he got married.
He got married and then he started yelling at his wife for driving egregiously. And I
He used to go 100 miles an hour on the first lane and get mad at people going like 85.
let me tell you something. Okay, Pastor Eugene. This man would get angry and honk at a guy going 80 on the left lane and go around to cut him off. Do you know how fast you have to go to cut off a guy going 80?
Wait, no, I'm going
81.
to side with this guy because left is passing lane. It doesn't matter. It's not a speed lane. It's not a certain speed isn't dictated for you to qualify you to be on the left lane. Left lane is to pass. So if someone's going faster than you, you move over.
But why is he going faster than
He was
80?
passing everybody.
Yeah. So that's wrong. Okay, I get that's wrong, but just because you're going 80 doesn't mean you qualify to be on the left lane. Let's get that straight.
It's true. But I also have to say that one time he cut a distance by half. The journey was supposed to take about 2.5 hours. We got there in an hour and a half, hour 15. So this is the type of individual we're talking about.
Well, I mean, he can really. I hope he appreciates the mercy God has shown
Absolutely.
him in his
Yeah.
life. He's still alive.
He used to tell me, should I hit this turn at 60? I said, why do you play games with life?
Sam and I had to
Why?
make jokes in the car to take our minds off of his reckless driving.
No one is comfortable in his car. Yeah, anyway. Yep. That's why he changed car like 3 times. But
Okay,
now
so
you-
I
yeah.
guess if we want to simplify it, strive to obey the law. When you discover that you have broken something that is sinful, then confess it to the Lord, and always act in a heart of gratitude. I think that's the bottom line. You want to have that over your life. And if you're worried about exactly what speed you're going to, I don't know how far you are in your sanctification, but Let me tell you, I don't think that should be a concern for you right now. I think there are other things you should be worried about first. So tackle on the big and then let's get to the small. When you tackle on the small first, you're in danger of going into Pharisee territory.
Thank you for that. Let's all be going at the speed limit or adequately fast along the flow of traffic. Thank you, Pastor Gene. And we thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we have a discussion on gluttony. We are going to have to move the buffet conversation to next Monday. This is going to be very, very exciting, especially because I do love buffets. Tune in next week to find out.
Sushi buffets are in a different category, I believe, than other buffets.
It's true.
So I don't think you can be guilty of the sin of gluttony if you go to a sushi buffet. Is that true or false?
That's false because yeah.
We've gotten ourselves in a lot of
I
trouble.
don't know what you're talking about.
I carried the
you
team.
eat nothing.
So we can talk about our eating expeditions next week.
Yes.
We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight. Finish the race. Keep the faith.
Peace.